On this Tuesday night, Manitoba and Toronto move to code red. The new restrictions imposed as COVID-19 spreads out of control.
You should assume it is everywhere.
The Prime Minister's plea to do the right thing and mounting pressure from Alberta doctors.
If we don't do something, we will see death rates and refrigerator trucks in the front of our hospitals.
Plus, how a circuit breaker lockdown would work. Indigenous groups swallow up a Nova Scotia seafood giant, the deal's significance and potential risk. And troubles with the transition. What's really behind Donald Trump's refusal to concede the presidency?
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We've watched it happen in other countries like England, France, and parts of Italy, and we knew Canada was not immune to a second wave of COVID-19. Now it is happening. The virus is spreading so fast in some regions, new restrictions are the only thing that can stop it. And today, the entire province of Manitoba and Canada's largest city moved to code red.
I want to warn you, in the plainest possible terms, that COVID-19 is out there at levels we have not seen before. You should assume it is everywhere, and that without proper precautions and protections, you are at risk of infection.
For the next 28 days, Toronto bars and restaurants will remain closed to indoor dining. Casinos and bingo halls will also be closed. Group fitness classes are banned. People are being urged to not socialize with anyone outside their immediate household and to work from home whenever possible. And starting on Thursday, all of Manitoba will move to code red too. That means no social gatherings, non-essential retail stores will be limited to curbside pickup, restaurants move to takeout and delivery only, gyms, rec centers, churches and hair salons will be closed, though schools and daycares will stay open, and non-essential travel is discouraged.
We've been pleading with Manitobans to follow the fundamentals, but the numbers continue to climb. It's clear that further action is needed, and this action is needed now.
Here's why. Manitoba continues to have the highest number of active cases per capita of any province, 376 cases per 100,000 people. The second highest is Alberta, followed by Quebec, then Saskatchewan and British Columbia. COVID fatigue and fears of businesses going under has led to some pushback against imposing new restrictions. Today, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau urged political leaders in Canada to do the right thing, as he put it.
I would hope that no leader in our country is easing public health vigilance because they feel pressure not to shut down businesses. I understand that worry, but let me tell you, that's how we end up with businesses going out of business.
The Prime Minister said if provinces need more federal financial support for businesses, they should ask for it. David Akin has our top story tonight.
We're seeing record spikes this morning across the country. So I urge the premiers and the mayors to please do the right thing. Act now to protect public health.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau would not name the premiers or mayors that need to do more, but it was pretty clear where the hot spots of the country were as the day broke. Some parts of Ontario, Alberta, and Manitoba.
I think the mayors would encourage the provinces to follow the evidence and enact the measures to protect business for the long term and human beings and life in the short term.
Resistance to more lockdowns comes from a concern that the risk to local economies outweighs the health risk. Trudeau says that's the wrong way to think because his government is providing subsidies to ease any pain from lockdowns.
We will be there as a federal government with direct supports for workers, for families, for businesses, for business owners.
But Ontario's premier, for one, says more support for employers is crucial.
We need more support for businesses. That's what we need. We need more support, financial support, and I'd be more than happy to sit down and talk to the Prime Minister about that support.
In Quebec's François Legault says premiers have been telling Trudeau for months to boost health transfers.
Because we need to hire people. And to hire people, we need to know if we'll have the financing in 2 years and 3 years from now. And so far, most of the money announced by Justin Trudeau since the beginning of March is non-recurrent money.
One thing the premiers and the prime minister do agree on, now is not the time for Ottawa to invoke any of its emergency powers to force the province to do something. The prime minister has not used those powers at any point in this pandemic and does not want to do so now. Donna?
David Akin in Ottawa, thank you. The virus is spreading fast through Alberta, too, where there's been some reluctance to impose tighter restrictions. In a letter to Premier Jason Kenney, a group of doctors from across the province warns of catastrophic consequences to the healthcare system. They say hope is not a strategy, that what is needed is a short, sharp circuit breaker of lockdowns. Heather Yourex-West reports.
After last spring, the concept of shutting all but essential services is now familiar to Canadians. But this time, officials say in Manitoba, the lockdown won't last long.
This short, sharp set of restrictions to stop the spread of COVID-19 in Manitoba and to bring the entire province under the same restrictions.
It's known as a circuit breaker. The idea is that when COVID-19 is spreading exponentially through a community, a short period of lockdown can break chains of transmission, causing growth to slow. But it can't stop virus spread completely because essential businesses cannot close.
Certainly, an approach like this is not without possible harms. We also have to think about the potential negative economic and psychological ramifications of this.
We've seen other jurisdictions implement sweeping lockdowns, indiscriminately violating people's rights and destroying livelihoods. Nobody wants that to happen here in Alberta.
But while Alberta's premier continues to reject the idea, a growing number of the province's doctors are sounding the alarm.
If we don't do something, we will see death rates and refrigerator trucks in the front of our hospitals. And we have a narrow window to be able to deal with this. And we can deal with this if we shut things down for 2 weeks.
More than 70 Alberta emergency room and intensive care physicians sent a letter to the Alberta government Monday asking the province to consider the circuit breaker approach. Alberta's top doctor says the idea has not been ruled out.
When we're looking at all of our options, we know that there is no one perfect way to manage our COVID-19 experience. We need to look at all options on the table, including something like that circuit breaker.
With stakes so high, it's a last resort kind of measure. Question is, with daily case counts on the rise, how long do you wait? Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
At the start of the pandemic, Indigenous communities across the country had few cases of COVID-19. That has changed. Indigenous Services Canada says it's aware of more than 2,000 infections among First Nations people on reserves since the start of the pandemic. As of Monday, 771 cases were still active. The prairies have been hardest hit. Alberta has recorded at least 620 infections in Indigenous people. There are more than 450 cases in Saskatchewan and over 500 in Manitoba. The Manitoba First Nations COVID-19 Pandemic Response Coordination Team says active cases in the Indigenous population there is far higher when you include both on and off reserve cases. Together, they account for about 20% of all active cases in Manitoba. Today, Prime Minister Trudeau committed more than $61 million in funding to help Manitoba First Nations battle COVID-19. The money is intended to support the implementation of public health measures, to build up capacity for surges in cases, and to ensure food security. There has been an unexpected and historic turn of events in the dispute over Indigenous fishing rights in Nova Scotia. A coalition of Mi'kmaq groups has entered a $1 billion partnership to buy one of the country's largest seafood operations, Clearwater Seafoods. They will own a 50% stake in the company and gain control of all of Clearwater's fishing licenses in Canada. It is a big move, though as Ross Lord reports, it doesn't resolve some long-standing issues that have led to anger and violence.
The deal is touted as the single largest investment in the seafood industry by any Indigenous group in Canada.
This is strictly a commercial transaction with a major North American company, Canadian company. And we just feel so proud in being able to be an owner, 50% owner.
Clearwater is Canada's largest holder of shellfish licenses and quotas, specializing in lobster, scallops, crab, and shrimp. In a statement, Clearwater Chairman Colin MacDonald says the deal represents great value for shareholders and leverages the expertise within the company while advancing reconciliation in Canada. The deal is worth $1 billion. Indigenous leaders say it will not solve disputes over their so-called moderate livelihood fisheries, but analysts say it's a significant development, a pure business deal.
We're seeing a growing number of these. There's a community in northern Yukon that actually owns 49% of a regularly scheduled airline. There's communities around Fort McMurray who spent $850 million buying storage capacity for the oil sands.
In a review about Clearwater, a financial advice website notes earnings are forecast to grow by 109% per year, but it cautions interest payments are not well covered by earnings and that profit margins are lower than last year. Not everyone is convinced the deal is a slam dunk. The chief of the Sibaganaggity First Nation, who's been forced to literally fight for Indigenous fishing rights, says he needs more information before supporting it.
There's always a risk, I guess, so we need to iron out that and see if it's a good risk versus return. So we'll see very shortly, and we'll go from there.
If the sale goes through, leaders hope it creates more jobs for Indigenous harvesters and their communities in a company that currently employs thousands of people.
We also certainly have every intention of integrating the Mi'kmaq into the company.
Clearwater says its shareholders will make a final decision on the deal in January. Ross Lord, Global News, Windsor, Nova Scotia.
Defiant and in denial. Coming up, why is President Donald Trump refusing to concede, and how is the Republican Party responding? President Donald Trump still claims he won the election. President-elect Joe Biden calls that an embarrassment and says nothing will stop the transition of power when Trump's term ends in January. But as Jackson Proskow reports, the transition could be turbulent.
Mr. Vice President, is it time to concede?
Despite clearly losing the election, President Donald Trump's team is working overtime to discredit the results.
There will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. All right, we're ready. The world is watching.
Trump's Secretary of State suggested defying the will of voters.
Have you congratulated Vice President Biden yet?
While Republicans insisted Trump is right to challenge Joe Biden's victory.
Until the Electoral College votes, anyone who's running for office can exhaust concerns about counting. No reason for alarm.
The Trump administration is still blocking any attempt at transition and stopping agencies from cooperating with Biden.
I think it will not help the president's legacy.
The rest of the world seems to have moved on. Leaders are lining up to engage with the president-elect, including Trump allies like Turkish President Erdogan and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
I look forward very much to working with President Biden.
Thank you, sir.
Exactly 4 years ago, outgoing President Obama invited then President-elect Trump to visit the White House.
Because if you succeed, then the country succeeds.
Trump's defiance today is unprecedented. So is his relative silence following the election. Instead, he's tweeting up a storm about unfounded claims of election fraud that he has yet to prove, while launching lawsuits that are not supported by evidence.
Jackson, there's obviously a real push to try to keep the Trump brand alive, even though he lost. There are lots of theories about why he wants to hang on, and many of them involve money, right?
That's right, Donna. In fact, the Trump campaign has been bombarding supporters with emails soliciting money to help with what they say is a court fight against the election. In reality, though, when you read the fine print, it points out that the majority of that money is actually going to be used to retire Trump's campaign debts. Donna?
All right, Jackson Proskow in Washington. Thank you.
Is it time to concede?
Still ahead, Trump's party hits a loyalty crossroads.
You're watching Global National.
Now that the U.S. election is over, it's safe to say much of the world is relieved. American politics is so divided, and President Trump was such a disruptor, it was hard to know what was going to happen next. Now that he's lost, it's the future of the Republican Party that's uncertain. Will it remain the Trump Party? That's what Eric Sorensen is looking at tonight.
The COVID-19 crisis is mushrooming south of the border, the numbers rising in 46 states. More than 100,000 cases daily could soon be 200,000, say experts. President Trump said the COVID story would disappear the day after the election. For him, perhaps, but while he has had nothing to say about it, Republican governors are dealing with hospitals close to being overwhelmed.
They are really at the brink of not being able to take any more people and the overflow mode, particularly in our intensive care units.
President-elect Biden has struck a COVID advisory council and is calling for leadership from Washington.
Wear a mask.
But Donald Trump is still president, and he is focused not on COVID-19, but on discrediting and overturning the election results. Some Republicans at the state level are speaking out.
I think the president's comments that there's some national conspiracy around this aren't supported by any of the facts. And they are damaging to democracy.
Questioning the election's legitimacy has angered Republican officials in Georgia since they run the elections there.
And what I don't like is people out there trying to undermine the system.
But in Washington, Republicans still need Trump. They're worried they could lose control of the Senate if 2 January runoff races in Georgia don't have the full backing of Trump and his supporters.
Mr. Vice President, is it time to concede?
So Republicans in D.C. have circled the wagons to protect Trump by not questioning what he's doing.
Do you suspect fraud anywhere else?
I can't speak to that.
Trump, they realize, is still more popular than they are.
Well, there's no place where the majority of the Republican Party isn't more loyal to Trump than against Trump. So he's going to try and still be the centerpiece of the Republican Party, perhaps even as the Republican Party is trying to move on from his 4 years.
Some in the GOP may quietly be looking ahead to a Joe Biden presidency.
I know Joe Biden. I shared with him. We got along. I'll be fine.
But if there are Republicans who would welcome the end of this chaotic presidency, they have something else to keep them up at nights. Rumblings that Donald Trump could run for president again in 2024. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
Next, the mission to properly represent a fallen soldier's faith. Tomorrow we will observe Remembrance Day and honor all those who fought and never came home. Thousands are buried in war grave cemeteries, many of the graves marked with a name and a simple cross. But not all of those who were killed were Christian. And now, 75 years after the end of the Second World War, there's an effort to fix some old mistakes. Abigail Beeman has the story.
He served overseas in 101 Squadron based in England, which was the squadron that had probably the most losses.
Morley was fortunate enough to bail out when the plane was shot down. But he landed in a tree.
We don't know exactly what happened, except the locals told investigators that the Germans shot him.
They shot him while he hung there. So it was a very terrible situation.
Morley Ornstein was just 20, killed in action in the Second World War. A cross ended up marking his grave in Germany.
Even though it's clear that he was of Jewish faith. And 75 years went by and nobody noticed until I did.
Ellen Besner wrote Double Threat, a book about the 17,000 Canadian Jews who served in that war. When she noticed the cross, she wanted to make it right.
I'm a mom of boys who are that age, and Morley died and sacrificed himself so that my kids could go to university, my kids could finish high school, and my kids could have a life here in freedom in Canada. It was the least I could do to fix it.
Besner reached out to a British historian who's worked tirelessly changing more than 100 incorrect war grave emblems to Stars of David.
It's part of the struggle against anti-Semitism. It's part of the struggle against people who lie about that Jews didn't serve in proportion to their numbers in the population, when in fact the reverse is true.
Besner gathered Ornstein's war records. You can see his own handwriting identifying himself as Hebrew.
In this house, he lived for about 2 years.
Then came an incredible boost from another Morley who grew up on the very same Toronto street.
I remember meeting Morley. I sort of got a big grin on my face. Somebody finally has the same name as I do.
92-year-old Morley Wolfe has vivid memories of the Ornstein family. He wrote a letter to the Commonwealth War Graves Commission.
Both my parents spoke Yiddish, and I certainly have a clear recollection of Morley's parents conversing with mine on occasion in Yiddish.
Their efforts worked.
The different pieces of the puzzle that come together to mean that we can be confident that he identified as a Jew, and therefore that is the most appropriate religious emblem to be going onto his headstone.
The transport process to the cemetery in Germany is being held up by the pandemic, but Flying Officer Morley Ornstein's new stone is ready. We showed it to his old friend.
Lovely. Well earned. Well deserved.
Those involved hope sharing Ornstein's story could help find some relatives the commission was never able to all those years ago. Abigail Beeman, Global News.
Global News will have live coverage of tomorrow's Remembrance Day ceremony in Ottawa. You can watch it at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 a.m. Pacific. We'll also be streaming it live on our website, globalnews.ca. And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the sunrise over Toronto. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please send it to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.